Welcome to the I Love Negotiating podcast, where we aim to equip you with the practical strategies, techniques, tactics, and tools to dramatically improve your negotiation results. My name is Jan Potgieter. Over the past 15 years, I've consulted to and trained many of the world's leading brands in more than 60 countries to help them improve their business negotiation results. I've trained just under 10,000 people face-to-face in a small group format, and I've negotiated on camera one-on-one with almost 4,000 people from most major cultural backgrounds. In this podcast, I want to use my experience to bring perspective to your negotiation challenges.
So, Darren Roos, thank you very much for joining me today. It's both a privilege and an honor to be able to get a perspective from your experience and your view of life, as it were.
Thanks, John.
So, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you, and thanks for the invite.
So Darren, interesting thing. I mean, SAP, obviously one of the premier companies, premier brands in the world of business, been around for a long time. What is your view? Why has SAP continued to be so successful for so long in an industry that is really, really competitive?
I think there's a few reasons. SAP has, for over 4 decades, have produced very relevant technology. And I think the fact that they've remained relevant, and I use the word relevant, on purpose, is really one of the biggest contributing factors. The fact that they've moved with the market. The business used to be an ERP business, but today ERP is by far not the biggest part of the business. Being able to move with what our customers are looking for, I would say is one of the big reasons. And then the second one is that SAP has a great reputation for having a very high customer empathy. There are a lot of vendors in the market that have fairly adversarial relationships with their customers, and that's not the case with SAP. So SAP has I don't want to overuse the word customer-centric, but we have very deep, very, very close relationships with our customers. And I think that's the nature of where ERP started with those customers. Tens and thousands of customers who run mission-critical applications, and they have come over decades to rely very deeply on SAP. And that forms a level of relationship based on trust and reliance that really builds long-lasting relationships. So I think that customer centricity, both from a focus and relationship perspective as well as the technology, is what has led to this longevity and success.
That's great to hear. So often I encounter organizations where they kind of, they say that they're all about partnership, that they're all about customer service, but it's very seldom that you really see that in evidence.
Yes. No, look, it's absolutely the way it is at SAP.
That's fantastic. Darren, certainly from a negotiation context, but also maybe an overall business context, your portfolio, your experience is wide, it's global. What has been your view of the difference between men and women when it comes to doing business? Have you seen that reflected in the way that SAP conducts its business, or that your customers conduct their business?
Look, there's definitely a difference in the way men and women are treated when it comes to the workplace, and the reality is that that goes both ways. So in many cases, our customers are women. In many cases, the employees or the salespeople that we're putting in front of customers are women, and there's always a different dynamic. When there are two women dealing with each other, when there are two men dealing with each other, that dynamic is always different. And what we try and do, what I've always tried to do, is to try and make sure that we have a good match. And that's not always, it's not always the same gender. Sometimes it's a different gender, and it works on the personalities of the people involved. So I think, the way I would answer the question is it's definitely different. But it's more a function of the personality types of the people. And I think, I've had a lot of experience of having very successful, very good salespeople who've built great relationships with their customers. And the customer changes. So, the CEO or the CFO or the CIO, whoever it is that we're dealing with, leaves and a new person comes. And all of a sudden, that relationship doesn't work anymore. And at that point, you have to look at how you change the account team in order to better suit the customer, because ultimately, you want to make sure that customer is comfortable dealing with you. I think an overall comment is that, really good top female executives, are incredibly successful in the industry because, again, I spoke about customer empathy earlier. I think, in general, women are more empathetic when it comes to engaging with their customers, or maybe just generally. And that lends itself to really good relationships with our customers. When I look at my sales team, certainly the most successful sales leaders and salespeople are women. That's certainly a trend that I see.
That's very interesting. I know, from experience of working with some other clients, there's some industries where obviously it's been more traditionally dominated by males. I mean, think maybe construction or infrastructure, those kind of environments, and yes, women are making inroads there. But it's been a tough journey for them, and I think a lot of the time, and it's interesting to hear you echo that the women who rise to the top are often super competent because they've had to overcome, kind of an environment that was designed by men.
Yes. Look, I think, from my perspective, it makes me sound like I'm overly biased. I drive towards a 50-50 ratio of gender diversity in my team. My global head of sales for my business is a woman. She's, a phenomenal sales leader and is doing a phenomenal job and has had a fantastic career. But, I think that diversity gives strength. And I mean, you and I both grew up in South Africa. We understand the value of that diversity. And that's, whether it's gender diversity, whether it's racial diversity, whether it's generational diversity, all of those things, I believe, give you options. They give you, they give you options that give you the ability to try and, find a good match for that customer. And ultimately, nobody wants to, no one wants to do business with someone they don't like or that they don't get on with.
Yes.
So, that's really what we're trying to do, is to find a match for that customer, whatever that match may be.
Yeah, which is amazing. There can be harmony and diversity. It doesn't have to be conformity. Yeah.
No, absolutely. No, I mean that lack of diversity. When you end up with sales teams where everybody's the same, whether they're all women, whether they're all the same age, whether they're all men, whatever it is, that lack of diversity tends to lead to an unhealthy environment.
Very interesting, Darren. In your experience, what's your view of the conventional wisdom when we talk about business negotiation? What has your experience taught you?
I mean, look, it's an interesting question because I think everybody's idea of what conventional wisdom in negotiation is probably different. I think, it really depends on what you mean by conventional wisdom. Maybe if you give me a couple of points on what you think the conventional wisdom is, and then I'll comment.
I ask guys when we work with them, I ask people, I say, what do you understand? What do we mean with the term negotiation? Probably the standard response is folks will come up with something like, it's a win-win, or it's finding something of mutual benefit, etc. And there a couple of different spins on that. What would be your view?
So look, I think when it comes to win-win, I think that in the context of my industry, or to be honest, in my personal life, I think that for the benefit of a long-term relationship with a customer, the customer has to feel like they've won. And this is something that I think I've spoken to my guys about a lot, and it's certainly something that I coach my negotiators on, is that we by definition are winning because we're closing the deal. If the competition don't get the deal, then we've won. Obviously we want to do good business. We don't want to do bad business. So there's a caveat there. But provided we're doing a deal that we're comfortable we should be doing, it is more important that the customer feels like they've won than that we feel like we've won. And to be honest, it's an important point, because when you're in the heat of a negotiation and it tends to become fairly, I don't want to use the word adversarial because that makes it sound negative, but it can become competitive. Maybe competitive is a better word. Then, this isn't a board game. At the end of the day, the customer needs to feel like they've won, and I want my customer to feel like they've won. because, that's going to lead to a better relationship in the future. And I think irrespective of what the situation is. So, I think as far as win-win is concerned, it does need to be a win-win. It's just understanding from our perspective what winning means for us. Winning is not getting the extra €1 million. Winning is getting the deal. For the customer, it's getting the right price because they've already made the decision to do business with us. The other thing that's really important, especially in enterprise software, is that the price can always go down. The price can always go down a bit more. But the problem is that when that price goes down, generally something needs to be taken away. Whether that's the level of support that the customer is getting, whether that's the implementation services that they're getting, whether it's, what technology is in the bill of materials. And it's very important that you're in the detail with the customer to the extent that they understand that there is a relationship between what they're getting and what they're paying. And all too often I see salespeople lose that lose sight. The link is exactly right. They lose sight of that link, or they allow the customer to lose sight of that link, and it becomes very one-dimensional in that people are only talking about the price. And obviously that's a huge issue because, when customers, or whoever, irrespective of what you're negotiating, when you lose sight of what it is that you're buying and only what you're paying for it, that becomes a big issue. And it's something that, we'll all be able to relate to. Most of the people listening to this will buy a car. And when you go in and you negotiate the price for the car, if the sales rep is not talking to you about the service plan or about the extras that are on the car, etc., if you remain focused only on the price and in the background you're busy removing stuff as the price goes down, then that becomes a problem. When you remain focused on the value and you're saying, well, look, the car's going to cost a bit more, but for this additional value, it has these extras. You have this tire warranty. You have this maintenance plan. You're not going to have to pay for servicing in the future. It's got this roadside assist value. Then people are far more comfortable with the price. But the reality is that all too often we do lose sight of what customers are getting for that value, and then it becomes problematic.
It's interesting what you say, Darren, because I think a lot of people think of negotiation as an event rather than a process.
Yes.
And, that's often when you get surprised with having to deal with the kind of confronting price in a one-dimensional way. If you recognize, and clearly to me, it sounds like you guys are really good at doing that. If you recognize that negotiation is an overall process where, the context, for the transaction is created right up front, and then it incorporates all these different levers, all these different things that comprise the value, then, you ease things along. Obviously, if it just gets down to price, often we just find ourselves haggling.
Sure. Look, I think another data point there would be that, really good negotiators, and this is not a negative towards the customer, whether they're on the customer side or whether they're on the other side, really good negotiators will get what they want, and the opposition or the person they're negotiating with will feel like they've got what they want, because you've got a level of transparency and they followed a process, as you put it, that creates a better understanding of what everybody's getting. I have lots of examples of where, a customer situation, and, this is whether it's at SAP or at my previous role, where a situation will be escalated to me with a customer where when I dig into it and I speak to the customer, the price that they've got is actually very, very good. The value is very, very high, but the customer is unhappy. And then there will be other situations where, I'll do an analysis of a large deal, and I'll go, wow, from an SAP perspective, this is a phenomenal deal, and yet the customer is very, very happy. And then it comes down to how we've negotiated the deal. It comes down to, as you put it, the process. It comes down to, articulating the value rather than just the price. And that is absolutely something that people need to recognize plays a huge role in both the customer satisfaction and what the likely outcome is likely to be from a value perspective.
That's super insightful, Darren. It's seldom that we encounter folks with the intuitive understanding of the importance of engaging human nature in the process of creating satisfaction rather than just leading with the evidence. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's really smart. In your view and experience, Darren, then why do you think people fail when it comes to negotiations? What are the mistakes people make?
I mean, look, we just touched on one now, which is forgetting to articulate the value and only focus on the price. That's certainly one. I think people, as I said earlier, it can become competitive. And at the point that you lose sight of what you're trying to achieve and winning becomes the objective, let's call it an emotional element. That certainly can be why people fail. And then, the one thing that I'm a huge proponent of is planning and practice. If we're in a situation where we're negotiating something with a customer, then I want a lot of planning to go into it. If we've got a specific negotiation event or we've got a call, irrespective of what it is, then for every 10 minutes in front of that customer, I want an hour of prep, 2 hours of prep to make sure that we understand the detail, we understand the strategy, we understand exactly what it is that we're doing, so that we're better able to articulate that value. So we're not allowing blind spots. And then, I want to role play it. We put people in the room, and I want to understand exactly, what it is that they're going to say, so that we ensure that we are conveying the value, and ensuring that we understand the customer perspective. Because the reality is it's very easy to become myopic sometimes and lose sight of what the customer view is. You can become overly focused on your side of it. I spoke about the value that customers are getting. It's very easy to go, well, look, you know what, you're going to get that roadside assistant, you're going to get the tire policy, and you're going to get the windshield protection. If the customer doesn't value those things and the customer doesn't want those things, then there's no point in putting them in. And I find that in the role plays that tends to uncover those blind spots. So the preparation is a big thing also.
That's amazing. That's amazing, that insight there, Darren. Very mature view. From your perspective, so a couple of things that are interesting. Whenever we work with organizations, and this has been true just about anywhere in the world we've gone, and I've had the opportunity now to do this in 60 countries, and I've never had a different answer. Everybody always says to me that the most difficult negotiations that they face are not the external ones. It's not the ones with the customers. It's the internal ones. Aligning your own organization. Would you say that this is something that's also true in your environment, that those tend to be more challenging, the internal ones?
Yeah, I mean, I think that SAP's got 83,000 odd employees, and I think in an organization this size, there's a certain amount of control that is put in place to make sure that the commitments we make to customers and the way in which we do our business is ethical and consistent. You would imagine that trying to make sure that 83,000 people are all giving the same message is a relatively complex thing to do. So I think that the internal negotiation can be difficult. One of the benefits at SAP, and you have to know where to go, but one of the benefits at SAP is that we have a quite a flat structure. It's not very hierarchical. So a sales guy is very likely to reach out directly to me and say, look, I'm trying to do this. I'm getting some internal resistance. Can you help me? And that's not a cultural phenomenon in a lot of organizations. So, certainly I came to SAP, just over 3 years ago. I didn't expect to find it that way. But I think that when organizations, irrespective of how big they are or how much bureaucracy there is in order to protect its customers and the organization, provided you have a mechanism to escalate effectively and efficiently, so quickly and decisively, and that your leadership are empowered to make decisions when that is required, then it works pretty well. And fortunately, that's the way it works with SAP. So, although there are processes and protocols in place, the escalation is fairly simple, and it's encouraged. And fortunately, as a leader in the business, I am empowered, which means that I'm able to cut through, that complexity pretty quickly.
Yes.
So, that helps a lot. But yes, I would agree that in most organizations, that internal negotiation can very often be more difficult than dealing with a customer.
Amazing. Okay. And Darren, what's your view? And I know this is once again, it's not intended to be a loaded question, just more
Sure.
anecdotal. What is your view when it comes to cultural background? So SAP obviously, even though it has German roots, very very international, very global company, operates probably in just about every country where folks do big business. What is your view? What is your experience when it comes to culture and negotiation?
Yeah, look, we touched earlier on the fact that it comes down to people's personalities, and what I would say is that there are certainly some countries where the cultural nuances are very dominant and tend to override what are largely global trends or global characteristics. So countries like Japan, for example, or Israel, for example. Where the complexity that you deal with, and Israel and Japan being opposite ends of the spectrum, that they can be very very consistent in their characteristics. With the Israelis being very adversarial, very vocal, and very consistent in the way that they behave, and the Japanese exactly the opposite. In that it's very very ritualistic. There's a lot of ritual in the process. What people are saying is not necessarily what they mean. They are desperate not to disappoint anybody, and there's a very important element of not wanting to say no, for example. But again, like the Israelis, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, they're very consistent. In that behavior. You're going to find the same thing from most customers. But I would say that, outside of those two, there is a lot of commonality in what people want and the way that they go about getting it in most countries that I've worked in, and look, I've worked all over the world. So I think it's outside of those two, which come to mind immediately because they're so consistent in their difference. Whether it's I'm just kind of rattling it through my mind, whether you're in Brazil or whether you're in Mexico, whether you're in Indonesia, whether you're in South Africa, it really comes down to the person that you're dealing with, and really it comes down to the same thing, which is that people want to feel like they're getting a good deal. They want you to be transparent. They want you to be consistent. And if the one thing that I would say, for the sales leadership that are listening to this, or for executives that are leading to this, is that one of the biggest problems that I have in understanding what's happening in a transaction is typically when I'm getting it second hand or third hand. There is no substitute for me getting on a phone or getting on a plane and getting in front of a customer, because in 95% of cases where I'm being told there's a problem, there isn't really a problem. We're just not listening. My ability to cut through that by getting in front of a customer or getting on a phone with a customer, in 95% of cases, I'm able to solve the problem because I actually get the information firsthand, rather than getting it filtered through somebody who's either misunderstood or doesn't want to give me the news. So, it's not unusual for a deal to be forecast or for a transaction to be forecast, and then there's a problem, and I'll get 26 excuses why the deal can't happen. And you get on the phone with the customer, and they go, look, I told them 3 months ago I wasn't going to do the deal. You're going, well, okay, I'm glad I made this call. So, a lot of it is smoke and mirrors, and I think, getting to the source of the information is often the best way to get to the bottom of it. And a lot of the, where this question started was the cultural differences. A lot of these cultural differences are used as smoke screens to obfuscate the real information.
And would you agree, that through the increased use of email and phone calls for interaction rather than face-to-face meetings, obviously it amplifies the opportunity for misunderstanding.
Yeah, I mean, you say email and phone calls. I mean, I think the reality is a phone call would still be great. What we find today is that there is an inordinate amount of email, and us speaking to customers, especially with a millennial generation firmly entrenched in the workplace now, speaking to customers or engaging with customers via text or WhatsApp.
Yes.
And, yes, I think we all know from our personal lives what the propensity is to misunderstand what's going on when you're having a WhatsApp conversation with someone. But yeah, I think, there is little substitute for being able to just pick up the phone or get in front of a customer. That is certainly something that I encourage, my people to do more. Try not lose that human touch. And ultimately, you need to build relationships with people. We started this conversation with the importance of being able to build a relationship with someone. People, it's an overused term, but people buy from people. And, we will all have experienced the situation where, you're working an account, you have little success, and then there's an account management change and somebody comes in and all of a sudden the account is lit on fire and there's loads of opportunity. And it's a personality thing. People suddenly like each other and they go, actually I trust this person, I find them credible and I want to do business with them. It's as simple as that. And that's not going to happen via email.
That's right. That's right. Great insight there, Darren. Great insight. Just a couple more questions just before we wrap up.
Sure.
You've been very successful in building your career. Do you have, and I'm not expecting it to boil down to a precise formula, but if you were to give our audience some pointers and you say, you know what, this has been my formula. This is what's resulted in me being successful. What would you say that would be?
So look, I think the first thing that I say is that I've been very lucky. Part of success is undoubtedly being in the right place at the right time. And I've been very fortunate in my career to be in the right place at the right time. So, I think that's been a characteristic and I'm grateful for that. The next thing is that I work very hard, Jan. I'm a solid 16, 18 hour a day person. And, I can tell you that I haven't put an out of office on my email for the last 15 years. Up until fairly recently, I had a very unfortunate health situation. But, in the last 13, 14 years before that, I haven't had a sick day from work. I work really, really hard. So I'm very, my philosophy has always been that I can't guarantee I'm going to be the most creative person in the room. I can't guarantee I'm going to be the brightest person in the room, but I can control that I'm the hardest working person in the room. That's something that I have infinite control over. So, I think I've been lucky. I work very hard. And then the third thing is that I've been very focused on where I want to go from a career perspective. So I've always had a plan. And, plans need to be changed. You need to be able to be flexible and dynamic, and I'm very comfortable with change. But you have to have a plan. You have to know where you're going. And critically, and it's probably the most common mistake that at any point I mentor 5 people, and I see this in every single person that I mentor, is that when I start to work with them, I say, do you have a plan? And they say, absolutely. My next job is X. They never, ever have thought about what's after that. And that's something that I always work on. And the problem is that with only knowing where you want to go next, it's very difficult to be positioning yourself for where you want to be after that. And the reality is that when you promote someone or when I promote someone or whatever, you very rarely promote them with only that job in mind. If I'm going to take a sales guy and move him into a first-line sales manager role, I very, very rarely am thinking about whether he will make a good first-line sales manager. Most of the time, I'm thinking about, is he going to make a good second-line sales manager, or is this a future, sales director, managing director, chief operating officer for the business? Because to be honest, if they don't have the runway for the future, then I'm probably not going to give them that shot at being a first-line sales manager. So people need to be thinking 2 jobs ahead at least. They need to be thinking, if they're a sales guy today and they want to be the managing director of the UK business for SAP, they need to be thinking, what do I need to do in order to be perceived as relevant for that role? What do I need to do from a development perspective in order to get to that role? And what performance am I going to need to deliver? What sacrifices am I prepared to make in order to get to that next role? And that tends to put them in really good shape. And that's something that I've always done. So, it's not about being overly ambitious or not executing on the current role, because if you look at my CV, I've always done the jobs that I've done for many years. People tend to sometimes hop quite a lot. That's not been the case with me. In the last 14 years, I've worked for 2 companies. So, I've been very consistent. As my roles have changed, I've always retained responsibility for what I had before I moved. So my sphere of influence has grown. But I think it's always come down to me having a very clear plan on where I'm going. So a good dose of luck, lots of hard work, and having a plan. Sounds a little cliche, but it works.
No, that's very, very insightful there. Last question I have for you. You talk about mentoring others.
Yeah.
And this is a characteristic of success, being teachable, submitting yourself to instruction, to correction, etc. That's something that sounds intuitive to you. Who's been a role model to you? Who would you say, can you identify, and, you can name names or not, however you feel comfortable, but if you looked up to others, have you found that submitting yourself to coaching, to, the benefit of learning from the experience of others has helped you?
Yeah, so look, you made the point already, which is that being teachable, understanding what your weaknesses are, and being open to change the way you do things is very important. And I think, if I think about my earlier career in Software AG, my previous company, the people who would have worked for me in 2005, 2006, back, when I was the country manager in South Africa, and some of them still work for me now, so I couldn't have been that bad. But they'll tell you that I've changed a lot. I'm very different to what I was, 13, 14 years ago, in my leadership style, in the way that I do things. And that comes down to having an appetite to adapt the way you do things and change. And the reality is that you can't self-teach. It's very difficult to have that level of self-awareness without somebody to help you reflect on it and identify the areas of improvement. So I think the reality for me is that I've had for the last 10 odd years or so, there've been two gentlemen. One is a guy called Jacques Chamas, who's a French gentleman who I've spent quite a bit of time with over the last few years, and another gentleman called Peter Casey, who's an Irish gentleman who lives in the US. And both Peter and Jacques have both had a profound impact, I think, on me over the last 5 to 10 years as I've developed. But it's a very informal relationship. Neither of them are formal mentors who I spend time with every week or every month. It's just not the way it works. The way it works is they're friends, but they're both seasoned, experienced business executives who give me a very different perspective on how I look at what I do, and I can kind of ad hoc call them up for advice. More recently, since I've been at SAP the last couple of years, I've worked with a gentleman called Terry Nordell, and my engagement with Terry is a bit more structured. He attends my executive meetings. He gets to know my team, and he works with me and has worked very closely with me. And Terry, again, has had a profound impact on my development over the last few years. But I equally learn from my bosses. I learn from people who work for me. And that kind, when you understand the importance of talent, and you understand the importance of building, multidisciplinary, diverse teams, and a lot of people talk about hiring people who are better than them. It's a bit of a misnomer, because nobody that you hire is going to be better than you at everything. What you're trying to do, in my opinion, is you're trying to hire people who are better than you at some things. And certainly, if I think about the team that I've built now, I recruited a lady called Melissa DiDonato, who joined me recently, who's a phenomenal sales leader. And I genuinely believe that Melissa could do that job better than me. I hired a guy called Christian Pedersen to drive our products moving forward, and there is no doubt in my mind that Christian can do that better than me. There are things that I do better than them, but when it comes to their areas of domain, they do it better than me, and I've learned from both of them. So I think it's really more about having a willingness to learn and being able to identify, what the weaknesses are, and having people who can help you to be more introspective and reflect on what those weaknesses are. That leads you to become, better at what you are. And it doesn't matter whether you're, whether you're running a 3 billion euro business at SAP or whether you're an individual quota carrier salesperson, that introspection and ability to self-reflect and improve yourself, both personally and professionally, is very important. It's a phenomenon that, people are very eager to learn and to acquire knowledge and to adapt when they're at school or when they're at varsity. But I see a lot of people hitting the workplace and they think that process has ended. It shouldn't end. That self-development process is important.
Darren, that's amazing. I'm mindful that we've taken up quite a bit of your time, but I really want to thank you for having the willingness to share some of your experience and insights to with our audience and to those who wish to improve their prospects for success. I think it's been very generous of you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jan. It's been a pleasure chatting to you, and I appreciate the opportunity.